Kate Galloway is an Associate Professor of Law at Bond University and the Senior Law and Technology Analyst for the civil society group FutureWise. She researches the intersection between law and technology and is a regular speaker and commentator on the role of technology in the law, in legal practice and in legal education, with particular emphasis on the incursion of government power on the citizen. Today, Kate will speak on data is the new black. Privacy is a must-have accessory.
Thanks so much. Who has an iPhone or a smartphone? Yes? Hold them in the air. I've got a Deborah Conway concert recently. I'm not quite as exciting as Deborah Conway, and I'm not going to sing It's Only the Beginning. But she asked us all to hold up our iPhones, hold up our smartphones. Okay. Who's got location services on their phones? Yep, okay. And who uses Google Maps or iMaps? Yep, need them to get around. Okay, we have significant amounts of data heading out from this venue right now, telling anyone who wants to know exactly where you are. Today I'm going to, but in the words of Scott Morrison, how good is data? Am I right? Okay, it is so convenient. How did I find my way here? I needed to get an Uber, I had to turn on my location services because mine is kind of on and off because of what I'm going to tell you today. And it is just so convenient. It's difficult to imagine how we would be living our lives today without the convenience of data. But despite this convenience, there is a huge cost to each and every one of us. And what I'm going to argue today is that this cost is causing, or should cause us to think differently about the relationship between the state and the individual. So, as a brief outline, I'm going to first identify how data technologies have altered the capacity of the government to intrude into our lives. I'm going to show you why this represents a real risk to our self-determination and ultimately to our humanity. These are themes which have come through very clearly in the last couple of sessions at least. And I'm going to identify that these risks represent a breakdown of privacy as a fundamental human right, where privacy is that breathing space between the individual and the state. And it's that breathing space that allows us to fulfill our human promise and to be fully human. So government has always collected information. There's a story, you might have heard from it. We relive this story every December about a pregnant woman and her partner who went on a donkey to the place of their birth to register in the census. It's quite a famous story, and that's an example of old school government information collection or data collection. But, and you'll see here these clerks busy collecting data. These are the actual filing cabinets that the government sold in an op shop in Canberra a couple of years ago, filled with our data, citizens' data. So what characterises this old school data collection and storage and processing is its small scale. It's localised, it's difficult to share, it relies on our own cognitive abilities, as amazing as they might be, to be able to make sense of this data, and it's difficult to spread around unless you have, I don't know, a van of some sort. And the typical types of protections that we rely on in this quite individualised notion of data collection and storage and processing are fairly traditional. Here's a copy of the actual warrant issued to permit the Australian Federal Police to raid the ABC offices recently. So we've got judicial oversight of information collection, parliamentary oversight, reports tabled to Parliament. We've got the right of appeal, judicial review. We've got things like ombudsman, and privacy commissioner. We've got these kind of traditional methods of protecting the public from government overstepping its legitimate boundaries in terms of our information. But let me tell you, this has all changed. What we see now in contemporary data collection and processing and the access of data is on a huge scale that is facilitated by new technologies, in particular what's known as big data and artificial intelligence or machine learning. It's predicted that by 2020 there will be 1.7 megabytes of data per second per person that is produced globally. And someone very kindly did the maths, and that is 2.5 quintillion bytes of data per day. I don't even know how big that is, but I'm just telling you because it sounds very impressive. Now, this data is the data in your phones that you're holding up. It's data about all of us who've been to school, who are in universities, at the office, when we swipe cards, it's videos, it's CCTV, it's biometric data. It's tracking us everywhere, and every time we log on to the internet, we log on to our computers, we carry our smartphones around with us. Every time we shake it, I'm guessing, because it tells you how long you've spent online. Isn't that very uncomfortable? Anyway. Every time we do this, we are creating a digital fingerprint of where we have been and where we are going. And these processes, this is a very technical drawing, I understand that, but bear with me. These processes allow governments and corporations to find patterns in huge amounts of data that the human brain simply could not possibly ever imagine. So that is the power of data, and corporations are in this as well, and but my focus here is really on government overreach. But in addition to collecting all of this data that we're giving away for free, hi, have my data, we're saying, because it's convenient, how good is data? But in addition to this, we have enhanced government data collection that I suggest amounts to the architecture for a surveillance state. And here are just a few examples. This is a somewhat truncated tweet by Edward Snowden, and I'll tell you why it's truncated, because I relied on artificial intelligence to set up my slides for me. That's why they look this way. And it's this slide because it knows what my preferred slide is, and then it stops offering me a significant menu of options, and they all look similar to this. That's what happens when you rely on it anyway. So as Snowden pointed out a couple of years ago, Australia passed legislation that required telecommunications companies to retain all of our metadata. So the record of our phone use, of our internet browsing history, depending on whether you talk to George Brandis or not, but all of that data is now freely available to government agencies, but not just government agencies, it transpires based on the latest reports of who's been accessing this data. Pretty much anyone. We've seen census fails, so-called, in 2016, whereby the government now collects our names and seeks to retain our records into the future to provide a longitudinal data set that can follow you around from cradle to grave. Charming. We've got the biometric data legislation. We get a driver's license in one state, takes our photo. All of those databases are now shared throughout the states and territories of the Commonwealth for the purposes of matching. So that's one-to-one matching, so they know that it's me when I appear somewhere, but also one-to-many. So if they don't know who I am and they see me on the CCTV, they can scan through their database of everyone else's biometric stuff and work out what my identity is. Why might government want to do this? Terrorism, they've said. If there's a suspicious person crawling around the perimeter of a stadium, they want to know who that person is. My response is, why don't you ask them? But so anyway, but it's not just this. So terrorism tends to be, we're keeping you safe, we're protecting you. But when you look at the text of these types of provisions, what we're seeing is government is using it for any circumstances, including debt recovery, unpaid taxes, unpaid fines, really important issue of fine evaders who shift from one state to the next, and now they can work out who they are because they're sharing biometric information. So these are the kinds of, and that's true, it will help in that, but I'm not suggesting that this is the pressing issue of our age. And finally, the decryption legislation. So encryption of data is what allows us to transact online safely without people stealing our bank accounts. Government now, if it wants to find out what someone is doing, can secretly ask or command the web designer or the software designer to decrypt, to hack into the code around your security so that it can access through the back door, but it's not a back door, the government says. These will create systematic or systemic backdoors into our encryption processes that actually puts the entire internet into question when you really look at it. So this is where we are at today, and what's really concerning is that the hallmarks of this legislation, this suite of legislation over recent years, is secrecy, a lack of oversight, and free movement of our information between government departments, security agencies, and often the private sector. And this has downstream consequences. But the other thing that government is doing is requiring us all to enter into government services through portals. So previously you had MyGov, which was used by anyone on any sort of government payments, but as many of us who don't receive government payments would have learned recently, when it came time for our group certificates, is now we don't get a group certificate from our employer anymore, but you can find out about it by creating a MyGov account. So I wrote to my employer and said, I don't want a MyGov account. I don't want the government, the government's got all my stuff, We'll address that in a minute. But this is what we're being required to do now. And of course, my health record, which has been described as a solution in search of a problem. So my health record is a very good example of creating a system that generates vulnerabilities in relation to our sensitive data. I saw this as I was preparing this morning, like I had prepared earlier, but I was kind of finalising things this morning. Anyway, Informatica makes the case why data needs AI and vice versa. So we know that AI, machine learning, is hungry for data. The more data we feed it, the better the algorithm gets. Who did that wacky thing about, wow, look at me when I'm old or young? Yes? Well, here's me 10 years ago. How cool. What fruit are you? Okay? These are not games. These are designed for us to give our data, including images, to an algorithm to teach it how people age. So, not the what fruit are you, that was just Cambridge Analytica taking all of your stuff. So this is where we're at. We now create so much data that we need artificial intelligence to manage that data. So we've got this feedback loop happening now where data needs AI, needs data, and so it goes. This is a picture of a man trying to close a stable door after the horse has bolted. Because what I really wanted to talk about initially, when I talk about these things, is to say, and so therefore, ladies and gentlemen, we need a Bill of Rights. But I think it's actually too late for that. And so we'll look at some solutions in just a little while, because all the while government is generating this surveillance architecture to which we are willingly entering because how good is data? Because it's helping us in so many ways. They're saying, trust us, because if you have nothing to fear, you have nothing to hide. And so I say to you, everyone goes to the toilet, don't they? Come on in, government. We have nothing to hide, therefore nothing to fear. This is a fundamental trick that is used to disguise the reality of incursions into privacy. And this occurs in 4 key ways. So the first is through surveillance and interrogation, and these have a chilling effect on freedom of association and freedom of speech. Surveillance, the ubiquitous CCTVs, we have governments collecting samples of sewage, generally in places like the western suburbs of Sydney, as a means of drug testing to target welfare recipients. So we've got this constant surveillance happening, and of course interrogation is the active asking for information, and that's what's happening through these portals like MyGov and My Health Record. So this is Jeremy Bentham's classic panopticon effect. What happens to us when we know we're always being watched in some way? The second issue involves processing, including the aggregation of data. So it might well be that we have nothing to hide, but what happens when you disclose some types of information to some people, say your doctor, and other types of information to other people, say to your bank? You don't want those 2 bits of information joined together so that the person at the bank knows everything about you according to what happened in the doctor. And this can occur even if information has been de-identified. Case in point, a few years ago, in accordance with its open data policy, which sounds very, very enticing, the government de-identified Medicare records of 10% of the population and put them online. 2.9 million people's records online. So a team at the University of Melbourne went in, and the first thing they did was decrypted it to work out who their providers were. So that included doctors and pharmacists and midwives and whatever. And then the government went, oh, no, it's not such a good idea, took it down again. But the second step that the team at the University of Melbourne did was to identify specific people included within the data set. So Vanessa Teague, one of the team, who is a woman from Victoria, born on a certain day, and knew dates of birth, of course, of 2 of her children, and looked for a woman's obstetric history within those dates, didn't find herself, knew she wasn't in the record, asked a couple of her friends, and found them. So could re-identify that data based on publicly available information. They did the same thing for some sports stars. We all know when so-and-so's done their ACL and they went in for surgery last night and it was successful. I was going to say rugby league, but this is the wrong audience. It's AFL. Okay, I'm looking at Sarah. Yes, it's AFL, yes. Okay, so they did this, and they re-identified these people who were part of this apparently de-identified data. So this is an easy task, and this information was in the public domain. But what if it wasn't? What if you had a pregnancy terminated? Or what if you had a sexually transmitted disease? Or what if there was something else that you didn't want people to know? Next is dissemination, and that's private disclosure of, or public disclosure of private facts, akin to what I've just described, but also distortion of the true picture. So what we see, what we risk with access, and governments accessing all of this data, is that it is deployed to ends that it wasn't intended for. Who's heard of robo-debt? Heard of robo-debt? So that's an example of this. The algorithm is deliberately designed to match up two incongruent sets of data, namely your social security payments within a year, which occur on a fortnightly basis, and your annual taxable income, and to issue a notice of liability or a show cause notice out of that. So there are distortions that occur when we misuse this information. And finally, decisional interference by government. And the easiest example to give is the social credit score in China. So everyone's data is collected by the state, and everyone's given a score based on what they're up to in their lives. And you would be surprised just how much you can work out what people are up to when we are fully connected. So this has consequences for jobs, for marriage, for travel, and it can land you in prison. And we're seeing examples of this in Australia, believe it or not. For example, the Parents Next program, which is a social security payment for single mothers, actually single parents, but it's 98% women, and a significant proportion of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women as well. And you're required to get your payment, you're required to take your child to a particular number of activities each week, the reading at the local library or swimming lessons or whatever. And if you don't go there and you don't check in, and you don't log in your app, your social security is suspended. You don't get your payments. Had a baby last week and can't make it with your toddler? Too bad. Your money is cancelled. Okay, that's a real life study based on a parliamentary inquiry which recommended this be toned down. So we're seeing reports from people on this program that it's affecting their lives. They are second guessing everything that they are doing because of this interference based on the data that is being collected about them and their activities. So what are the solutions? Solutions include data hygiene. So where you can, opt out of my health record. That's the recommendation that most people in the tech world are giving. We can't control everything though, obviously. If you need access to government services, you need to log on. I might observe too that there are some members of the community, I know from Rosemary's talk earlier on, there are technologies that are essential for living a full life for many people with disabilities. So we need to think carefully about our data hygiene and what it means for us personally. Agitate, that's the people with the flags. It's kind of a peaceful revolution that's happening there. So we need to educate ourselves about the impact of data and what is happening with government collection of our data. And we need to demand that our parliamentarians are similarly educated. A lot of them are saying at the moment that this suite of legislation is operating the way it was meant to, which is just shocking. It's frankly shocking because it's a rejection of the rule of law. That might sound like hyperbole, but I believe that to be the case. It's a fundamental erosion of our system of governance. And of course, lobbying parliamentarians for changes in the law. A Bill of Rights is necessary, but it's not sufficient. A Bill of Rights would articulate our humanity. It would articulate that breathing space between the citizen and the state. But I don't think that's going to be enough, because what we see is the deliberate erosion of even these foundational principles, many of which exist as common law principles as well, which has always been the standby. Everyone who argues for a Bill of Rights, for every person who argues for a Bill of Rights, there's a common lawyer saying, "Oh, it's in Magna Carta." We're so hip right now. The common law's always dealt with this, hasn't it? Well, we're not seeing much action on that front at the moment, and I think the impact of these new data technologies is so pervasive, and because the horse was so big and so strong and bolted so hard, and because there are so many benefits for us, that what we actually need is to return to tin tax and to renegotiate the social contract. I know it was imaginary, but just pretend. We need a new way of understanding who we are as humans vis-a-vis the state. And if government has only one purpose, surely it is to uphold our humanity. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that talk, Kate. We now have some time for some questions for Kate. So if anyone of you has a question, if you can put your hand up, and then if you could just, after I choose you, if you could just wait until one of the microphones arrive with you. So yeah, just go directly. Oh, yes, no, behind. Yes, you. Thank you very much. The gentleman in front of me to the left. Excellent.
Thank you so much for the insightful and enjoyable talk. I just wanted to ask, it seems as if the Australian perspective on, for example, the right to privacy is notably different to that of America. And it seems almost as if libertarianism and just that general focus on civil rights and liberties is very much a kind of avenue for other things, such as, for example, marriage equality. Do you see that changing? Do you see rights and liberties becoming more and more important? Just kind of an opportunity for other things as well.
Thank you. Yes, it's interesting to see the way that those sorts of libertarian arguments have become skewed in our political discourse. I think that it's important to recognise that we've got a Westminster system. Westminster systems aren't all that flash around the globe just at the moment, and so we're seeing the pushback, I think, from the 1% who are coming in to seek to reclaim some territory that's been lost over time from the, the much more inclusive politics and civil rights movements, perhaps, let's say, from the post-war period through to the sort of the 1980s. And so it's the political discourse that's really stamping down on a lot of these rights. And that's why, thinking about what I was going to say today, our fallback position is always, oh, we need a Bill of Rights, rights are so important. But really, democracy is about a vibe. And once you lose that vibe, I know I'm citing from actual High Court precedent. Once that vibe starts to get shaky, I think we're on really shaky ground. So I'm not suggesting that we give up advocating for enhancements in the law and progress in the law, but we know, for example, from the Northern Territory intervention, that governments can always put the law to one side to suit their methods. And so I was reflecting, on the panel discussion earlier on, how do you make this transformational change in society? One thing I think is that there's quite a lot of, look, I'm really sorry everyone, don't be offended about this, but there's quite a lot of old people in Parliament. And I do wonder if once the younger generations start to come through, if we'll see a shift, because their sensibility is quite different. I'm optimistic that what we're seeing is a pushback to an age that we've been through, but that we will emerge from this into a new age, if that makes sense.
And this lady down.
Hi Kate, thanks very much for your very interesting talk and reminding us how important privacy is to our humanness. I'm Emily from the Victorian Equal Opportunity Human Rights Commission. Just have a question, could you tell me if you have a feeling for which countries may be doing this privacy right or better than we are?
Yes, literally everyone. That's probably an overstatement. In Western nations, pretty much everywhere. So there's a reason why the Decryption Legislation passed in Australia, and that's because we're the only Western nation pretty much without a Bill of Rights. Okay, so that's where there's nothing to stop it. That's really convenient for the Five Eyes Alliance because they can get all their back doors through Australia. And what's more, when the minister produced a report to Parliament, the bits that were secret, which was almost all of it, he deleted not redacted, so you don't even know that it's been taken out. So we've got such a secretive environment around this, and that's permitted because of our lax framework of accountability within our laws. European Union is much better at it, but I was thinking this morning, I'll say, and so the right to be forgotten in Europe is very cool, but the data is still there. So that's why I think that a Bill of Rights is really important, because it does constrain the capacity of Parliament to be passing these laws in the first place, and it does require these safeguards. But once the data is out, we actually need something more profound to protect our humanity. And I'm not sure that that's necessarily there yet.
Yes, a young lady.
I just wanted to ask about predictive data being used for prediction and predictive analytics. When data is collected using past systems that have kind of been collected under a lot of discriminatory and racist systems, and that is then used to predict future outcomes, to what extent is that reinforcing these discriminatory systems, and what is the solution to that?
Yes. Well, one of the big promises of big data is prediction, and that is false. So that's fake news. Because you've heard of the black swan problem. So, when the English and swans were defined by their whiteness, and they saw a black swan, they go, oh my God, is it even a swan, right? So this is the problem with predictive analytics, is that they're going to find the same things that they've been finding in the past. Now, one of the observations I don't see very often is the reflection that our common law, judge-made law itself, is like a bad algorithm, because it reproduces the past and reproduces the biases that are baked into every aspect of the law. So that's one thing. When we're using, so a similar thing is happening, of course, with algorithms. It's a huge problem. We know that, and that was the point I made about, I think, dissemination of information is an incorrect picture, because it's either created by people with an image of themselves in mind. So you've seen the images of the hand dryer, the white hands under the hand dryer. The hand dryer turns on when it's got AI technology, and a pair of black hands goes under and it doesn't turn on. So technologies are made with an image of a particular person in mind, and they're based on data that comes from particular data sets. And until we grapple with the questions that technology is not neutral, technology is a tool, algorithms are a tool, they're created by humans, and humans need to be able to think analytically about the purposes to which these are put. So there's two things. One is, what's the purpose? Government says the robo-debt algorithm is doing what it's designed to do, which is brazen and shocking in my view, because it's yes, thank you. Being challenged in the federal court, fingers crossed. Thank you, Victorian Legal Aid. The second thing is, even if you have got a valid outcome in mind, we need to design those algorithms and that code and look at the data ethically, and we need to look sensibly at the data that's being collected, because that will reproduce those hierarchies of disadvantage otherwise.
Time just for one more.
Well, you spoke of activism. Are there just one or two examples of aspects of the law that you think could be pushed to change?
Oh, it's really hard. Even with the encryption legislation, the opposition was lobbied very hard and undertook not to pass it, and then the next day passed it, and then said, oh, we've got some concessions. The government will change next year, which is now, and you'll never guess what happens. You'll never guess this. You'll never guess. Government's not changing them. So I think that there's a lot of civil society groups who are working on a lot of projects at the moment. So the press freedom is currently, it's related to this because it involves And there's so much happening. There's been so many bits of legislation, piecemeal legislation that have been put into place over the last 10 years or so. I think it's 40 or 60. I'm really bad at numbers, but it's a huge number of bits of legislation that it's really difficult to keep, and that legislation is complex. So I dip into it as a means of trying to understand what's going on, and each new one requires really technical understanding. So it's very difficult to get it's not like marriage equality or voice to parliament, which are very challenging campaigns in themselves. This is spread so broadly that it's really difficult. I think maybe perhaps one of the most effective ways of doing it would be for people to understand how much their own lives are under the pump, or in the spotlight perhaps from government. And the second thing is probably to be a little less racist about terrorism. So that might be ways to stop the government.
So thank you so much for illuminating